When Dad was abroad, everything felt different, quieter, almost as if the normal rules did not apply. I never imagined that one of those days, what my mom would do next, would leave me questioning everything I thought I knew about her. Dad's absence wasn't unusual. He was often called away for work. However, the occurrences of that evening did not appear to be typical. Mom decided we'd have a special night. She set the dining table with the good plates, the ones we only brought out for the holidays. Or when Dad's clients visited, she even lit candles, casting a warm, flickering glow across the room. It was over the top, a touch of elegance that didn't fit our usual quiet nights together. "Let's make tonight memorable," she said, with a small smile. Her words felt loaded with meaning, but I shrugged it off as hurt, just trying to make the night fun. As we sat down to dinner, the quiet felt heavier than usual. Mom looked at me with an intensity that seemed out of place. She poured me a glass of sparkling water, clicking her glass against mine as if we were toasting. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something, a secret just waiting to reveal itself. The flickering candlelight danced in her eyes, and I found myself feeling a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. "Dad called," she said, casually taking a sip of her drink. "He won't be back until next week." That wasn't unusual, but the way she said it made it feel different, almost as if she was relieved. Like she was secretly happy to have the house to ourselves. I laughed it off, trying to lighten the mood. "Guess it's just you and me for a while," I said, raising my glass, but inside I was curious what was going on in her mind, why the fancy dinner, the candles, the whole atmosphere. After dinner, she suggested we watch a movie, something we wouldn't usually watch, she said, with a mischievous grin. She picked a film I'd never heard of, a foreign film with subtitles and dramatic music. I thought I'd be bored, but it turned out to be strangely captivating. We sat close together on the couch, the glow from the TV casting shadows across the room every now and then. I glanced at her, trying to read her expression, but she seemed focused, completely absorbed in the movie. As the movie ended, she turned to me with a curious smile. "Did you like it?" she asked, her voice soft, almost a whisper. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of connection, like we were sharing a secret, just the two of us. There was something magical about that moment, something unspoken but deeply felt. "Good," she replied, her smile widening. I wanted tonight to be different. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning I couldn't quite grasp. I wanted to ask her what she meant, to understand what was going on in her mind. But part of me was afraid of disrupting the strange, enchanting atmosphere that had settled over us that night. I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, my mind racing, replaying the evening's events over and over. There was something about the way she looked at me, something hidden beneath the surface that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination. But deep down I knew that wasn't true. Something had shifted between us, something unspoken but powerful. The next morning things felt normal again. Mom was back to her usual self, bustling around the kitchen, humming softly to herself as she made breakfast. I tried to shake off the lingering sense of mystery, telling myself it was all in my head. But as I sat down at the kitchen table, I noticed her glancing at me with a strange expression, like she was remembering something, holding onto a secret only she knew. Days went by and the feeling only grew stronger. Every now and then I'd catch her watching me, her gaze intense, filled with something I couldn't quite understand. It was as if she was waiting for me to notice, to see through the surface and understand the hidden layers beneath. I tried to ignore it, to act like everything was normal, but the tension was palpable, impossible to ignore. One afternoon she asked me to help her with something in the attic. It was a dusty, forgotten space filled with boxes of old memories and things we rarely used. As we sorted through the boxes, she started telling me stories about her childhood, about things she'd never shared with me before. Her voice was soft, almost wistful, as she recounted memories of her own parents, her dreams, her regrets. I found myself drawn in, captivated by this new side of her. This part of her life I'd never known. But then in the middle of a story, she stopped and looked at me with that same intense gaze. "There are things we keep concealed," she murmured gently, almost to herself, "things we don't even tell those closest to us." Her words shot shivers down my spine. I wanted to ask her what she meant, to understand the hidden meaning behind her words, but I couldn't bring myself to say anything. The silence stretched between us, heavy and charged, filled with things left unsaid. Later that night, as I lay in bed, her words echoed in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was trying to tell me something important, but I didn't know how to understand it. It was like a puzzle, a mystery just waiting to be solved, and I found myself drawn to it, unable to resist the pull of the unknown. The days continued, each one filled with a strange, almost electric tension. Mom would look at me with that same intense gaze, her eyes filled with secrets, and I found myself drawn to her, wanting to understand, to uncover the truth hidden beneath the surface. It was like a game, a dance of unspoken words and hidden meanings. And I was captivated, unable to turn away. And then one evening, as the sun set and the house was bathed in a warm golden glow, she turned to me with a smile. "Let's do something different tonight," she said, her voice soft and inviting. There was something in her tone, something that sent a shiver down my spine, a thrill of excitement mixed with a hint of fear. I nodded, unable to resist, drawn into the mystery that surrounded her. But this was only the beginning. There was more to come, secrets waiting to be revealed, a story that was just beginning to unfold. The days stretched on, each one tinged with that same strange feeling of anticipation. My mind was caught between wanting to know more and feeling wary about where things seemed to be heading. Mom continued to act like everything was normal, but her eyes often held a knowing look, as if we shared a secret. It was both thrilling and unnerving, an invisible thread binding us in some silent understanding that neither of us dared to voice aloud. One evening after a quiet dinner, she suggested we play a board game together. It was one of those games we hadn't touched in years, and as I dusted off the box, I couldn't help but feel the heavy sense of nostalgia hanging in the air. We settled down on the floor in the living room, surrounded by the dim light of a single lamp, casting long shadows on the walls. As we began to play, her laughter filled the room, soft and familiar, and I found myself smiling, feeling oddly comfortable. Halfway through the game, she paused, her fingers resting lightly on one of the game pieces. "Do you ever feel like life just moves too fast?" she asked, her tone reflective, almost sad. I shrugged, unsure of how to respond. "Sometimes I guess things just change whether we're ready or not." She nodded slowly, her gaze distant, as if lost in thought. "It's strange, isn't it, how things can feel so close and yet so far away?" At the same time, the air between us felt heavy, loaded with meaning that I didn't entirely understand. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something vast and unknown, a place both thrilling and dangerous. And part of me wanted to step back. But her eyes held me there, pulling me deeper into the moment, into the unspoken connection that seemed to hang between us. A week later, Dad called to say he'd be staying away a bit longer. I could see a flash of something in Mom's eyes when she heard the news, relief, excitement. I wasn't sure, but it made my stomach tighten. That night she suggested we take a walk through the neighborhood, something we hadn't done since I was a kid. The evening air was cool and we strolled in silence, listening to the quiet sounds of the night. The houses around us were dark, windows shut tight, leaving the streets feeling deserted. At one point she stopped, looking up at the sky, and I stopped beside her. She seemed lost in her thoughts, her face softened by the moonlight. "It's nice, isn't it?" she murmured. "Just the two of us." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. My heart was pounding in my chest, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me. There was something almost surreal about the moment, like we were stepping into a space that didn't quite belong to the real world. We stood there for what felt like ages, neither of us speaking, and I felt the tension building between us, like a taut wire just waiting to snap. Eventually she broke the silence. "I feel like we don't get to talk like this often," she said softly, her gaze fixed on the distant stars. I mean, really talk. I wanted to ask her what she meant, to dive deeper into whatever was hidden behind her words. But I hesitated. The air felt charged thick with something unamiable, and I could feel myself being pulled in bit by bit into a connection that felt as inevitable as it was terrifying. As the days went by, things only became more intense. It was in the little moments, the way she looked at me across the room, the subtle touch of her hand brushing mine. As we passed each other in the kitchen, I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination. But I couldn't deny the tension that hung between us growing stronger with each passing day. One evening I was working on a project in the study when she knocked on the door, her voice soft and hesitant. "Can I come in?" I nodded, feeling my pulse quicken as she stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. She leaned against the wall. Her arms crossed over her chest, watching me with an unreadable expression. "I just wanted to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. There was something vulnerable in her tone, something that made my heart ache with a mix of emotions I couldn't quite name. I set down my work, giving her my full attention. "What's on your mind?" She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor, and I could see a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "Sometimes I feel like I don't know who I am anymore," she said. Finally, her voice trembling, like I've lost some part of myself along the way and I don't know how to find it again. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to reach out to comfort her, to tell her that she wasn't alone, but I didn't know how. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in around us, and I could feel the weight of her words pressing down on me, filling the space between us with an intensity that left me breathless. "I think we all feel that way." "Sometimes," I said, my voice barely audible, "like we're searching for something, even if we don't know what it is." She looked up at me, then her eyes filled with a raw, unguarded emotion that sent a shiver down my spine. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion for understanding. We sat in silence for a long time after that, the weight of our shared understanding settling over us like a blanket. It was a moment I knew I would never forget, a connection that felt deeper than anything I'd ever known. And in that moment I realized that things had changed between us, that we were no longer just mother and child, but something more complicated, something that defied easy labels. The next morning I found myself thinking about her words, about the way she had looked at me, the unspoken connection that had formed between us. It was like a thread woven through time, binding us together in a way that was both beautiful and terrifying. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that we were standing on the edge of something vast and unknown. As the days passed, our connection grew stronger, more intense. Every glance, every touch felt charged with a deeper meaning, as though we were speaking a language that only we could understand. And with each passing day, I found myself drawn to her, unable to resist the pull of whatever was happening between us. One evening as the sun was setting, she asked me to join her on the porch. We sat in silence, watching the sky turn shades of pink and gold, the air heavy with the scent of summer. She leaned close to me, her arm brushing against mine, and I felt a thrill of excitement mixed with a tinge of fear. "I'm glad we have this time together," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to say, how to express the mix of emotions swirling inside me. All I knew was that I was caught in something powerful, something that defied words, and I couldn't bring myself to pull away. And then, without warning, she took my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine. The touch was delicate and timid, yet it sent shivers down my spine, a rush that left me breathless. We sat like that, our hands clasped together, neither of us speaking, and I felt a sense of connection that went beyond words, a bond that was as unbreakable as it was undeniable. But there was more to it. This was just the beginning of something that I couldn't fully understand, something that was drawing us closer with each passing moment. And as I sat there holding her hand, I knew that we were crossing into uncharted territory, stepping into a world that was as thrilling as it was terrifying. The days after that evening on the porch took on a dreamlike quality. I find myself drifting through daily routines, yet everything seemed to carry a hidden meaning, a silent pulse that felt new and raw. The tension between us was undeniable, but it remained unspoken, lingering in the air like the last note of a song, quietly resonating. It wasn't long before Mom suggested we start a new project together, a way to spend time constructively, she said. She mentioned it casually over breakfast, her tone light, but her eyes held that now familiar intensity. "Let's work on the garden," she suggested, gesturing toward the back, where the plants had overgrown, sprawling across the yard. The idea seemed innocent enough, but I sensed there was more to it than just gardening. The next morning, we stood side by side, sleeves rolled up, marveling at the tangle of weeds and roots. It was a surprisingly warm day, and the sun was already high, casting sharp shadows across the yard. As we dug into the soil, pulling up weeds and loosening the roots, an easy rhythm settled between us. She'd point out certain plants, sharing stories about her childhood and how her mother had taught her to garden. There was a softness in her voice, a vulnerability that made me want to listen to every word. The sun climbed higher, beating down on us, and eventually she suggested we take a break. She wiped the sweat from her brow and looked at me, an amused smile playing on her lips. "We might have bitten off more than we can chew," she laughed, glancing at the half-cleared garden. We went inside, washing the dirt off our hands, but the day felt far from over. Later that afternoon, while I was sorting through some tools, I heard her call from the kitchen, her voice carrying a tone of excitement. She found an old recipe for lemonade that she used to make, and she insisted we prepare it together, just as she had with her mom when she was my age. The kitchen became our haven as we squeezed lemons, mixed sugar, and talked about everything and nothing. With the lemonade finished, we carried our glasses to the living room and settled down the room, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. As we sat sipping the cold sweet drink, she leaned back, closing her eyes, a soft smile on her lips. "It's been a long time since I felt this relaxed," she murmured almost to herself. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over me, but at the same time I could feel the tension growing, a silent current that neither of us addressed. We sat in comfortable silence, but it felt as if words were hovering on the edge, just waiting to be spoken. The quiet was almost too much to bear, and I found myself holding my breath, wondering what might happen if I broke it. But she did it first. Opening her eyes, she turned to me, her gaze soft and thoughtful. "You know, sometimes I think about how different things would have been if life had taken me down another path," she said, her voice trailing off. She didn't need to finish the thought. I understood what she meant, and for the first time, I felt the weight of her unspoken words, the layers of regret and longing that had permeated her existence. I wanted to respond, to tell her that I understood, that I too wondered about the paths we didn't take, but the words caught in my throat, and I simply nodded, hoping she'd see the understanding in my eyes. The rest of the evening passed quietly, each of us lost in our thoughts. But that night I found myself replaying our conversations, her words echoing in my mind, the way she looked at me, the things she didn't say. It was as if we were standing on the edge of a cliff, and neither of us knew how to take that next step. The following day we returned to the garden, continuing our work in silence. But there was an ease between us, now a shared understanding that made the silence feel comfortable. She seemed more relaxed, and I found myself stealing glances at her, wondering what thoughts lingered behind her calm expression. It was as if we'd reached a new understanding, an unspoken agreement that neither of us dared to question. That afternoon, as we finished up, she suggested we plant something new, something that would grow over time, a reminder of our work together. We chose a rose bush, carefully digging a hole in the center of the garden. As we planted it, our hands brushed, lingering just a moment longer than necessary. The touch was light, almost imperceptible, but it sent a shiver through me, a reminder of the invisible thread that seemed to bind us. In the days that followed, things fell into a quiet rhythm. We spent our mornings in the garden, our afternoons in the kitchen, or sitting quietly in the living room, talking about anything that came to mind. Each day felt like a continuation of the last, a slow, steady build-up of connection that went deeper than words. And yet there was always that undercurrent of tension, that feeling of standing on the edge of something vast and unknown. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of pink and purple, she suggested we go for a walk. The neighborhood was quiet, the streets deserted, and we strolled in silence, the cool evening air brushing against our skin. At one point we stopped by a small park, sitting together on a bench beneath the trees, the world around us fading into darkness. "I'm glad we've had this time together," she said, softly, her voice barely audible. "It's something I didn't know I needed." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. I didn't trust myself to speak, afraid that the wrong words might break the delicate balance we'd found. But she reached for my hand, holding it gently, and I felt a warmth spread through me, a sense of belonging that was both comforting and terrifying. As we sat there hand in hand, I realized that things had changed irrevocably between us. There was no going back to the way things were before, no returning to the familiar roles we'd once played. We'd crossed an invisible line, stepped into a place that felt both exhilarating and forbidden, and there was no turning back. Our bodies seemed to lean into each other, as if drawn by an unseen force. We couldn't control the pull, the undeniable attraction that had grown between us. Back at the house, we lingered in the doorway, neither of us wanting the moment to end. Her stare held mine, posing a query to which I was unable to respond. But in that moment I understood that we'd entered uncharted territory, a place where words were no longer enough. Our hearts beat in sync, our breaths intertwining like the threads of a rich tapestry. We were lost in the depths of each other's eyes, our emotions raw and exposed. It was a space filled with unspoken emotions, a connection that went beyond anything I'd ever known. In the quiet of the night, as I lay in bed, I felt the weight of our shared experiences settle over me, a warmth that wrapped around me like a blanket. I knew that things would never be the same, that we were bound together in a way that defied explanation. And as I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of peace, a certainty that whatever happened next, we would face it together. But even as I felt that peace, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that this was only the beginning. There was more waiting for us, more hidden in the depths of our connection, and I knew that the journey ahead would be as unpredictable as it was inevitable. The days slipped by in a strange, almost surreal rhythm. We settled into our own private world, a space that felt separate from the rest of life. It was as if we were characters in a story, only we could understand. Bound by a connection that had grown over time, each day felt different from the last, yet each was colored by the same quiet intensity that had started between us. One morning as I was pouring coffee in the kitchen, Mom walked in carrying a book she'd dug out from one of the old storage boxes in the attic. It was a faded, leather-bound journal filled with sketches and notes that she'd written in her younger days. She handed it to me with a smile, her eyes bright, with an unspoken invitation to share in the memories. "I used to think I'd be an artist," she said, a soft laugh escaping her as she ran her fingers over the worn cover. "Life takes us in all sorts of directions, doesn't it?" I thumbed through the pages, captivated by the delicate sketches of landscapes, flowers, and portraits that filled the journal. It felt like a glimpse into a hidden part of her life, one that she kept tucked away, and I was grateful to be trusted with it. I studied each sketch, every line and shade, feeling as though I were discovering pieces of her that had been hidden just beneath the surface. After a few moments, she cleared her throat, breaking the comfortable silence. "You know, sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I'd followed my dreams," she admitted, her voice quiet, "if I dared to take a different path." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, and I could feel the weight of everything she wasn't saying. I wanted to tell her that I understood, that I'd often wondered about different paths myself, but I stayed silent, letting her words settle between us, a shared acknowledgement of the choices and sacrifices that had brought us here. As the days went on, that feeling of stepping into her world grew stronger. It was in the quiet moments we spent together and the shared glances that needed no explanation. In the soft, unspoken bond that had woven itself between us, we fell into a rhythm, each moment carrying a quiet understanding that made words feel unnecessary. One afternoon while we were tidying up the garden, she paused, brushing a stray leaf off her shirt. "I want to go somewhere," she said, her eyes lighting up with a hint of excitement. "Let's take a day trip, just you and me." The idea of escaping, even just for a day, felt like a breath of fresh air. We packed a basic lunch and started out, traveling via winding roads with the scenery changing from city structures to open fields. We didn't have a set destination in mind, just a vague sense of freedom, a chance to step away from the routines that had defined us. Eventually we found a quiet spot by a lake, the water glistening under the midday sun. We spread out a blanket on the grass, sharing sandwiches and watching the gentle ripples of the water. It felt like we were the only two people in the world wrapped in our own private universe, a place where nothing else mattered. As we sat there, lost in the beauty of the moment, she turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "Thank you," she said softly. Her voice filled with warmth for everything, for being here, for understanding, for being you. I felt a surge of emotion, a sense of gratitude that went beyond words. "I'm glad to be here," I replied, hoping she could hear the depth of my feelings in my tone. We spent the rest of the afternoon by the lake, talking about memories, sharing laughter, and basking in the quiet peace that surrounded us. It was a moment I wanted to hold on to forever, a memory I knew I'd carry with me long after the day had ended. As we drove back home, the sun began to set, casting the sky in shades of orange and pink. There was a calm between us, a sense of contentment that made the world feel complete. But even as I felt that peace, I knew that things would change. Time would move on, life would return to its usual rhythm, and this chapter we'd shared would become a memory. The following weeks were quiet, filled with the gentle ebb and flow of daily life. We returned to our routines, but there was a new layer to our relationship, a deeper understanding that bound us in a way that words couldn't explain. I took solace in the simplicity of our time together, in the tiny moments that reminded me of everything we had shared. One evening as we were washing dishes after dinner, she turned to me, a soft smile on her lips. "You know," she began, her voice thoughtful, I think this time together has been one of the most meaningful things in my life." Her words held a depth of emotion that took me by surprise, and I felt a warmth spread through me, a sense of gratitude for the moments we'd shared. "I feel the same," I replied. My voice was soft. "It's something I'll never forget." We stood in the kitchen side by side, a lovely silence falling over us. It was a moment of quiet understanding, a reminder of the bond we'd formed, the connection that had grown stronger with each passing day. And in that moment I knew that no matter where life took us, we would always carry this time together in our hearts.